People are creatures of habit. My wife and I always noticed that when our daughter Ellen was a baby, she used to be so much calmer and more content when we stuck with a daily routine. This was at a time when Ellen had no real knowledge of anything really, and was mostly functioning on instinct and mirroring the behaviours observed in her world. Until I began commuting into London, and then subsequently began working from home during the coronavirus pandemic, I didn't realise how important routine and habit really were to me. There's a lot of research that suggests that habit and routine are powerful tools to moderate mental health. Perhaps that's why so many people struggle with change. My name's Charlie, and I'm the video lead here at Perkbox. Today, we'll be talking about change agility and some techniques that you and your employees can employ to not just get by when change happens, but to thrive in it. While you're here, it's important to mention that we put out videos like this several times a month. So if content like this is useful to you, I definitely would recommend subscribing and maybe even hit that notification bell down below, and you'll be notified whenever we put out a new video. We wouldn't want you to miss any. So, what is change agility? In the world of work, there's no telling when the next unexpected change, the crest of the wave, curveball, or any other cliched analogy is going to come. Change agility is an individual's capacity for adapting to change quickly. It kind of does what it says on the tin. Most people appreciate novelty, serendipity, spontaneity. It's when change is unexpected, challenges one's beliefs, or is perceived as a threat, that it can be more of a challenge. In situations like this, people can react in many different ways. Some people are naturally change agile, while others might be extremely resistant, vocal about their discontent, and perhaps even quite confrontational about those changes. This is normally when a person is trying to defend themselves or the status quo that they want to hold on to. In many cases, the status quo is not better than the new normal, it's just what they're used to and what they know. A well-documented example of this is when software is updated. Whether it's software on your computer or something like a social network, the majority of people are resistant to the change at first. You might even be a little bit triggered by this if you're still trying to get used to the latest smartphone update, or if this is something that you've felt or experienced yourself in the past. Often, people will prefer an inferior user experience to an objectively, measurably better one, simply because of their familiarity with it. In a situation like this, more often than not, it's just a case of getting used to it, because it really is better than what came before. In this case, it can be harder to be change agile because ultimately it just takes some time to get used to. The real challenge comes when adapting to a change that perhaps is not better than what was before, or even if it's just that you don't perceive it as better for you. Whether it's referred to as change agility or something else, most companies value this competency in their teams. It's so useful for HR leaders to have the early adopters, the first people to agree, the people that will help convince others around them. It's also essential for you as a leader to be great at this. Really, change agility is an essential skill that, if honed, will not only help individuals in their careers, but will also help with larger, sweeping changes to company policy, law, government guidance, and loads of other things. One of the main reasons the latest smartphone update can be so jarring is not knowing what the value is. One of the best ways for you to be change agile is to understand why the change happened. This is really simple, but it's actually really important. The first thing you can do is ask questions. Find someone you trust that might know more of the context around the decision and see if you can learn more. Even if they don't know the actual answer, they might have a different personal perspective on it. You might find that understanding their point of view is enough to help you make peace with the decision that's been made, even if you don't know the original reason for the change. Empathy is such a powerful tool, and is such a valuable trait to cultivate in yourself and your employees. So in situations I've been in when I don't understand the reasons for a decision, I found it really valuable to firstly think about my leaders. The question to ask is, do I trust my leaders? Now, the person making the decision to make the change may not even be someone that you know. So when I say, do I trust my leaders, I don't just mean my boss, the person that I can see and talk to and work with and have my one-to-ones with. I also mean the company, its culture, the people steering the ship. Just because you may not personally know them, you can infer their intentions from your company culture. Hopefully, you've got a great company culture, and you can use that as a way to reassure your team and reassure yourself. I remember a leader that I looked up to in the past used to contextualize empathy in a very simple way. He would say, no one comes to work and thinks to themselves, I'm going to be really rubbish at my job today. No one's intention is to make someone else's life harder. I think that if you're working in an organization with a healthy culture, this definitely applies. I know that keeping this in mind for me has made me better at accepting change and moving on, even if I don't fully agree with the decision myself. Importantly though, if you take time to understand why someone has made this decision, there's a chance that you may end up agreeing with it. So taking the time to meditate on it, talk to your managers, get feedback from your employees, give feedback, and ask questions could be the most important thing that you do. And while I'm not saying that you should blindly follow any directive that comes from on high, it certainly won't hurt your career to be someone that your leaders can trust to be an early adopter and a leader of change. It's pretty rare that a change is entirely good or entirely bad. Anyone that's been around the sun a few times know that life is a little bit more complicated than that. If a change comes your way that you weren't expecting, it can be a really valuable exercise to draw up a list of pros and cons. It's important not to think about the way things used to be when writing up your pros and cons though. The reason for this is the familiarity factor that I mentioned before. It's very easy to subconsciously prefer what you're used to. So this is not about drawing comparison between the way things were and the way things are or will be. It's more of a case of looking at this new way of working, this new law, this new legislation, and objectively analysing it. When drawing up the pros and cons, you may find that some of the changes are going to give you more work or make life a little harder for you. It's important to remember that doesn't necessarily make the change bad. It's possible the change will make things better for someone else. So when drawing up your pros and cons list, try and think of the pros and cons on a wide scale, beyond just how it affects you. It's especially valuable to think about how it might affect your people and any teams that you manage. There's a good chance that by really analysing it, you'll find some positive impacts for your team, and perhaps even some positives for you that you didn't expect. For example, if some new legislation requires you to go through an extra level of process to safeguard company data, this might be more work for you, but it might protect the privacy of your users or your employees more than your current process. And ultimately, if your customers and your team are happy and feel like they are protected by you, that's good for you in the long run. Think about your peers, think about your work, think about your boss, perhaps people that report to you. If this change really was made to make things better, you'll almost certainly start to uncover some positives to the decision. And ultimately, that will probably make you feel better about it overall. This can be a tough exercise to do, but it's so important. If you can't find any positives, there's a good chance you need to just look a little bit harder. Or if this is one of those times when the change is actually going to be a net drain or a negative change, invariably those changes don't last very long. One of the best things you can do to make your peace with not knowing the whole picture is to try and focus on how to make it work for you. Sometimes you won't have all the context. It can be easy to get encumbered with what could go wrong and the parts that don't make sense to you. But in that situation, it's easy to get stuck in analysis paralysis. Something that's always worked for me is what I call jumping in at the deep end. It's a terrible analogy to use because I'm an awful swimmer, but that's not particularly relevant. One of the best ways to find out whether something really works is to do it. Even if it feels a bit weird, give it a try. Ultimately, that will be good for you, because even if you end up in a situation where you still don't think it's a good idea, you will have the added credibility of having tried it. You'll then also potentially have more measured critiques of it because you'll have seen it in action and can accurately describe what doesn't work about it for you or for your team. But the other equally likely outcome is that you will see what does work. You never know, it might actually change your mind. An important thing to consider is that no matter how much you try, you may find that you just don't like this change. That's okay, not everyone likes everything. But being change agile does not just mean being okay with and enthusiastic about changes. It means having the ability to move past your presuppositions and find a way to be productive in that new paradigm. This is where disagree and commit comes in. At some point, you may have to accept that maybe not everyone else feels the way you do. Maybe a lot of the rest of the people you work with are really happy with the change. It's important at this point to focus on the positives that you have uncovered. Disagree and continue to share your feedback in a constructive manner that makes it clear what is not working for you and why. But then commit, work with your team, get your head down and get the work done. Lastly, share what's working well with your employees and with your leaders. Don't pretend everything is okay and keep negative feedback to yourself. Definitely continue to give feedback. But outwardly, publicly, and especially with your wider team, focus on the positives to help encourage them to find what works for them. You'll find that when your team start jumping in the deep end, sharing feedback, discussing it amongst themselves, you'll all gain a better understanding of it. And again, you might find that you all learn why the change happened as a team. As a leader, it's often your responsibility to be the most change agile. Often you'll be the person who needs to convince your employees of the change and why it's important. So change agility for you is an incredibly useful skill. Really, it's one that you will need to work on and be great at. Take time to understand the changes that come down the pipe and practice empathy with the people who have made the decision. Work on finding the positives and negatives so that you can embrace what's good and mitigate against what's bad about these changes. Be courageous and jump in the deep end. Try it out before you pass judgment, and maybe even work for a while side by side with your employees to see what they think of it. Be true to yourself, share feedback in a constructive way. And disagree if you disagree, but then power through and make it work for you and your teams. And finally, share your successes. Let people know what's working for you as well as what could be better. But focus on the positives as much as you can to help motivate and drive the change in your teams. I hope you found today's video helpful. We'd love to hear what you think about this topic. So why not let us know in the comments below? And don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe for more content coming very soon. Thanks.